Hello everyone and welcome back to some more Nomifactory, where today we'll be picking up where we left off from last time. As is becoming tradition, today we start out the episode by mining. So the first goal for today is to get stainless steel, so that way we can finish up our blast furnace line from last episode. After we've got stainless steel, a priority of ours for a good chunk of this episode is just going to be getting polyethylene. You know, something tells me these mob spawners bugged out. I don't think they're supposed to be spawning pigs. So while I'm exploring for another ore vein in order to get manganese, I find yet another desert temple here. Oh, thank God, a drill core. Thankfully, knocking out our first goal of stainless steel isn't really too difficult since we already have the chrome from last episode and we got manganese from mining today. While I was crafting stainless steel, I also made this to-do board here. My memory sucks, so the main thing here is just so that way I can actually remember what I'm doing and also to mark milestones whenever we complete them. Since we've completed stainless steel, I'm going to remove the sign here and replace it with sulfuric acid, as that's a component we're going to need for polyethylene. And with that stainless steel, we can now work on level emitters, and another thing I also want to work on is a void upgrade for the drawer for the extraterrestrial matter in the back here. Now that we've added this void upgrade, all of the matter in the simulation chambers will slowly clear out so that way they can start processing pristine matter again. Returning to the level emitter from last episode, all we really needed to do in order to craft this thing was make a calculation processor and a stainless steel rod. And now with our calculation processor, we can craft our first level emitter. So essentially how a level emitter works is it's basically just a smart way to output a redstone signal. Unlike a lot of other machines in Applied Energistics 2, the interface for a level emitter is pretty simple. So simply you can control the number in the center here to control how much of a resource or energy level you want. And you can change the redstone mode here as well to make it so that way it will emit when levels are above the limit. So if you have 100, let's say, sandstone slabs in your system, it will output a redstone signal. And if you click this mode, it'll emit levels when they're below the limit, so if you have below 100, then it'll output a redstone signal. This distinction's important because we want this to output a redstone signal when we're below a specific amount of aluminium. And the amount of aluminium we want to have is probably going to be around 2,000 in the system, I want to say. Just so that way we never really have to think about it, but it also doesn't take up too much space either. The main thing you'll notice though with this level emitter is that it's not actually powered or online, and that's just because we don't have it hooked up here, which is thankfully pretty easy to do, especially with the ME conduits here. So now, as you can see, it's outputting a redstone signal. So the main thing you'll notice though is that this is outputting a redstone signal, which is what we want since we have below 2,000 aluminium, but it's actually disabling the blast furnace here since it needs a redstone signal to be disabled. In order to fix that issue, all you really need to do is take a screwdriver and take this normal mode here and invert it so that way this all needs a redstone signal to actually be activated. The reason why we want this set up like this instead of having it so that way this outputs when the levels are above 2,000 or something is because it makes it a little bit harder to more finely tune the amount of aluminium you have in your system. Since the level emitter here is detecting how much aluminium is present in the system, it can't really detect what is currently being processed in the blast furnace or what's in the input or output. So making sure that this is inverted like this so it only activates whenever there's actually aluminium needing to be processed is fairly important, at least to some degree. And setting this up definitely does take longer than it would to just do this without the whole emitting when below a level. But it's 3 clicks for more fine tuning, so I think it's worth it. And with that level emitter set up, we can remove this sign and replace it with second tier 3 circuits since that's the next thing I want to work on. Or at least it's something I want to work on a little bit further into the future. So now if anything, it's time to start working on polyethylene. So I've taken the liberty of looking through the polyethylene chain and slowly just mapping out the recipes here that we need to work through in order to get to it. So in order to create polyethylene, we need ethylene and oxygen, and in order to get ethylene, we need sulfuric acid and ethanol. Ethanol is its own small chain here on the bottom, which is just biomass, which we can easily get from sugarcane in 2 machines. And then to get sulfuric acid, it's to the left here, which just needs sulfur and water, and we can make sulfur from pristine blaze matter, which is why we need more DML expansion. And then in order to get the oxygen for the polyethylene, we just need to get silicon dioxide, which we can get from sand. And alternatively, you could electrolyze water or use like a basic air collector in order to electrolyze that in order to get your oxygen. But the recipe craft time is like 80 seconds for this, and then the electrolysis recipe is literally 75 seconds. So when we use silicon dioxide, it's like 12 seconds. Yeah, it's a pretty quick recipe, even though it only takes like 8 sand per craft. So it can take a little bit, but 12 seconds is way better than 80. So I think the first thing out of all of this I'm going to start working on is probably going to be the DML expansion. I think for now what we'll do is we'll just add another simulation chamber over to the side here and just another loop fabricator, but pretty quickly here we're going to need to get this remade. I'm sure you can probably tell by now, but this just really isn't like tileable to be scaled up like easily. So the first thing to do to actually work on a blaze model is to, well, make the blaze model itself, and in order to do that we need more hellish matter. Now that we've made the hellish matter, the next thing we need to do is make blaze powder, which is thankfully pretty simple. All you need is hellish matter and gunpowder, which we have already, thankfully. And then finally, to make the blank data model, we just need more electrical steel plates, it seems. And do we have steel? Or we have electrical steel, we just need to compress it. And now, just like that, we can make our blank data model, and now we can also make our blaze data model. Unfortunately, that's not a quest, since we need to get like every single blaze model, or nether model rather, in order to get that quest. And now with the model, all we need to do is just make the simulation chamber and loot fabricator so we can actually get our sulfur. So to expand the DML to include our blaze model, we're just going to place it on the side here and we'll hook up our power as well. And we use the blue channel to actually insert into here, which we actually had to left click in order to get to there. So now we should slowly start seeing some actual pulsating, oh, we aren't getting any actually. Why are we not? I just realized the reason we're not getting any pulsating clay into any of these machines is because we're not actually extracting on blue into here, we're extracting on red out of the drawer controller itself. To fix that, all we're going to do is we're just going to make this drawer extract on blue, like the one with the actual clay itself, to just go put into these two, and we'll swap it to round robin just so that way we can have everything be filled up at the same time here. Yeah, now you can see this is actually starting to get the clay filled up. That was the main reason. I'm kind of surprised I didn't catch that earlier. So now with the blaze model actually running, it's going to be producing both hellish matter and also it's going to be producing those pristine blaze models. You know, instead of just adding to this spaghetti mess, I should probably just completely redesign the DML setup here and actually expand it properly. Normally when you break a drawer, it'll spill all of its contents onto the ground, but if you craft up some packing tape, you can simply right click it, and now when you break it, it actually won't spill and it'll seal the contents within it. And so after a decent amount of time, we've completely redesigned our DML setup. This way it's a lot more expandable going to the left at least, and we can actually like access all of the machines pretty easily and see what's inside of them. So the way this is set up is it's basically inserting the polymer clay over there on blue still, and it goes into these simulation chambers. Then it extracts on purple and it goes into the top of these loot fabricators here, which eventually will get fed with the specific type of pristine model they have, or matter they have, and that is being done with these basic item filters, which are pretty easy to craft here. And then that gets extracted on red and it gets all filtered into this drawer controller here, which can then be easily sifted through. And the main reason I want this to be a drawer controller as well is so that way we can get a storage bus on the top, similar to what we crafted over there. Let's make sure we actually set these models properly though, so that the way they're actually processing their resources. And then using the resources we've gathered from each model, we'll put them into the drawers here like so. You know, I really hate walking on these conduits because sometimes it just bugs out your character so bad. The main issue right now though is that we've created this entire setup and it produces all of the resources, but it doesn't actually get transported over here where it needs to be used. So there's two ways to get the resources from over there over here so we can actually use them. And the first way is what we were doing before, which is just using item conduits. And then the second way is by using the ME system so we can actually pull resources out of it, and then that way we can more easily just access them over here or towards our power. For a distance like this, we could just literally use our item conduits, but actually using an ME system so it's easier to build up further away is probably going to be a better idea. But good ideas is something we don't do around here, so for now I think we'll just do the makeshift solution of just spamming down a bunch of item conduits, because I would rather just do that than actually have to hook up a brand new line of everything. So our numismatic dynamos over there insert on black, so we'll make sure to extract on black and put that on round robin. And then our ender pearls get inserted on brown over there, so we'll make sure to insert that on brown too. So now these are actually getting filled up with diamonds again, and this is actually getting the ender pearls it needs to actually process the damn resonant clathrate. Thankfully, after all of that, we finally are starting to get sulfur crafted up, which is the first step we need towards polyethylene. So now I think we can safely remove this sign and actually start working on the next step. Even though we've redesigned our DML and we've expanded it by one machine over there, that's not exactly the type of expansion I'm thinking of. I really want to get like a shit ton of models actually processing over there before I'd consider this done. So after we've made the sulfur, we can pretty easily make sulfuric acid with just some water and a chemical reactor, and thankfully it's a pretty low EU tick recipe too. I figure instead of just slowly crafting up all the machines and adding them one at a time, we should just get them all batched up together so that way we can get this all built up at once. And here, after about an hour or so, we've got all of the machines we're going to need in order to create polyethylene here. And that includes an ME interface and some steel drums, so that way we can access the fluids and get resources here a little bit more easily. And including that, I also added a storage bus over there so we could access the sulfur and not have to add more item conduits. I really want to be able to more than easily swap off these conduits when I need to. Especially considering where our power is placed right now. We're definitely going to move this into another chunk once I can finally afford that, but for now it's just going to stick here. So the first setup we're going to add here is actually going to be our silicon dioxide setup, because it's, well, pretty easy to do, especially considering we already have a cobblestone generator here, and I don't have to craft another one for it. So how this is going to work is we're going to have this export all of the gravel and everything upwards, and so that way it creates sand more than easily, and then the sand will get crushed. So as it turns out, I actually missed one machine, where we're going to need one more electrolyzer, so that way we can actually have this all function properly. So essentially the cobblestone gets produced here, and then it gets turned into gravel in this macerator, which then gets macerated into sand here. And then after that, it gets exported up into this electrolyzer, so that way we can actually produce our silicon dioxide from the sand. And then after that, the final step is to get the silicon dioxide actually produced. Why? I do not want water in here, please and thank you. Alright, let's place this again, but yeah, there we go. Now I don't have water getting filled up into here. So basically this will produce our silicon dioxide, and we need one more electrolyzer. It turns out I need another one, because we need to electrolyze the oxygen out of the silicon dioxide. Well, let's make sure we have more gold for that. And now, once it produces the silicon dioxide, we have it export up to here to actually produce our oxygen, which will have it export up to the top here, and that's where we'll finally use our steel drum. So all of this right here, just so that way we can get oxygen created, and I believe it also produces silicon, so we're going to need a way to export that easily. Thankfully, since we have silicon dust being collected here in this drawer, we can pretty easily just hook up an item conduit to just go from here all the way up to there. And as it turns out, we don't even need to add an item conduit here, just because it connects to the drawer controller at the back here. And then the last thing we need to do here is actually make sure this is all hooked up, and it turns out I forgot to have this one extract or export above, like so. So now, after this finally gets filled up, we'll start making our silicon dioxide, which will then get electrolyzed and everything. Now that we're producing oxygen, the next set of machines I want to set up is going to be in order to produce ethanol, which is going to be produced from biomass, which is pretty easy to do. All we really need to do is place down a brewery and a distillery. So the first step to create ethanol is here in the brewery, which will simply combine sugarcane and water, and it takes basically like any organic recipe, or at least a lot of them, and then you can make your biomass here. Once you've actually created your biomass in here, that's when you can then go into the distillery up here and actually convert it into ethanol, which if you look through all of the distillery recipes here, this is literally the most like yielding recipe. So we get 1,000 millibuckets down to 700, but at least we're getting a good amount, and then we can convert that with our sulfuric acid into ethylene. Although I suppose I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. The next thing we need to place down is our sulfuric acid chemical reactor. We also need to make sure we've got our steel drums on the top of both of these. So in order to create our polyethylene setup, we're going to place our chemical reactors here and here like so that way we can more than easily access the ethylene as well, which I forgot to make a drum for. And so now once we actually produce our ethylene and polyethylene, they'll go into drums here. And it is really important we have ethylene actually being buffered because we will need this for other recipes in the future, like vinyl chloride for instance. And we're also going to need isoprene. I'm pretty sure. And we also need styrene too. We're going to need quite a few resources in the future with this, so it's just a better idea to have this easily accessible. It turns out we actually didn't even need the third electrolyzer there because we get our silicon dioxide dust here. I guess I just can't really easily math these things out in my head. So now that we've got all of these machines placed out, the next thing we need to do is actually get everything connected to each other so that way it's not just, sitting here. Unfortunately, I had to take a quick detour there to create ender fluid conduits because we literally can't make this setup without the ability to do basic filtering. So since this chemical reactor is going to be for sulfuric acid, we're going to have the fluid or the ender conduits go into this chemical reactor for our ethylene, and we'll send it on the brown channel. Now that I think about it as well, we should probably move the drum up at least one space because we're going to be having an output of, I believe, used or diluted sulfuric acid, which we're going to be needing back. Yeah, it's diluted sulfuric acid we get from this recipe. So we'll place the one steel drum up here for now, and then we'll just have to, or we won't even place it here, we'll just have to make sure we filter it before we place it down. And since this is creating ethylene, we'll be extracting from here, so we'll make sure to extract on brown from here to put into here. And then we also need ethanol from this chain here, so we'll make sure to get the brown channel as extracting from here too. And now we need to extract the oxygen from up here into the actual fluid conduit system here, and we'll put you on blue so we know it's oxygen. And we'll have blue being inserted here as well. We also need to make sure to remember to place blue for our ethylene when we're extracting into here. So now with all of this out of the way, this is basically our beginning polyethylene setup. The main thing we really need to do is actually get resources into our ethanol, including water, and we also need to get our sulfuric acid processing. And in order to do either of those, we're going to be making sure to go underneath the platform here instead of just expanding horizontally this way. And just like that, now we've got our little platform here, so that way we can actually access these without it looking terrible up here. I don't want it to be too spaghettied up here. So the first thing we need to do for our brewery is actually get an infinite water source set up, which is incredibly easy with this endervor here. That's all we really need to do. And I might honestly, we're going to use pressurized fluid conduits for this system instead, just because it's simply water. And we shouldn't have anything going into this system either, so might as well, right? Turns out I need another water bucket. Hold on. Alright, and now with our second water bucket, there we go. Now it's actually full, and now we can actually access this and have it extract. Now we're getting a shit ton of water into our brewery. We're also going to need water for the chemical reactor, so I might as well just expand the fluid conduits here, so that way it actually just gives us free water too. So now with both of these out of the way, we actually need to get the items for both of them, which we're going to be doing with an ME interface, thankfully. So similar to what we did with the blast furnace setup over there, we're going to be extracting both sugarcane and we're also going to be extracting sulfur from here. So let's make sure we actually set the inputs. So it's sugarcane, and then we also need our sulfur. And then also make sure you disable the interface terminal thing here, so that way you can't see it whenever you're going to have your crafting setup ready. And now whenever we have this hooked up, it'll give us both sulfur and sugarcane. Then let me make sure it's a stack. And then before we get this hooked up, we also need to make sure to get the channel set up properly, which I believe we're going to need to get some item filters for, so that way it doesn't just mix everything up. Alright, so the first item filter we're going to be using is for the distillery here, and this is going to be where we put our sugarcane. And then for this one, we're going to be using our sulfur for here. So now with all of this out of the way, the next thing we need to do is actually get this hooked up to the rest of the ME system, which is over there. So simply put, all we're really going to do is just break a hole into the floor here and then just expand out the cable this way. And now with this ME interface actually being hooked up, you can already see the brewery start up, so that way we get our sugarcane. And now, okay, I believe, why are you not running? Well, I believe it wouldn't be running because it's not even hooked up to power. That would probably explain my problem there. Thankfully, we already had conductive iron smelting up from earlier, so we can just get this wire milled. And now that everything's hooked up, all we really need to do is just wait for everything to actually process, so that way we can actually start getting the filter set up for over here with ethylene. Thankfully, we have just enough spare resources for yet another storage bus, so I think we'll just set this one up in the meantime, which I don't want to partition you. So now if we actually look through the machines here, we can see that this one is producing silicon dust and is getting oxygen. This one's starting to produce our ethanol, although it just needs to get more biomass. It was missing the sugarcane earlier. This one's producing our sulfuric acid, which is already being put into here since this buffer isn't full. And now we just have to wait. While we wait, I figured it would also be a good idea to start getting more obsidian for void upgrades. When I initially built the drawer design here, I kind of forgot we need to add void upgrades to these 3 drawers here because we really don't use these dusts as much. I mean, there's still a use for silicon and everything, but not nearly as much as aluminum is used. So you gotta make sure that you at least void everything that's excess so that way you can actually keep producing, which is why this setup was blocked for a while. And now we can finally remove this sign since that's no longer on my to-do list, and I figure we can also remove the rest of these signs too since we pretty much have everything set up. Another thing to think about while we're waiting for all of this to process is the fact that when we use up our sulfuric acid, we get the diluted sulfuric acid that I was talking about earlier, and you can either use this to get back more sulfuric acid so you don't waste it, or you can void it. My thought process here is that we really don't need to recycle it because we get so much sulfuric acid from this recipe anyways, and we have infinite sulfur, infinite water. We're basically voiding nothing. The only waste here is just simply time. That's it. And here's also why those ender conduits were pretty important to get to the upgraded version, because we can't really use fluid filters without it, and we also need a trash can too. Also, I just realized the reason why this chemical reactor isn't even processing here is because or at least the ethylene recipe is MV and not LV here. So I guess like the other line over there, we've got to move the conductive cables a little bit so that way we can get our MV here, which I suppose we'll get yet another CEF crafted for this, so that's kind of painful. Okay, and now that we've got our CEF that is MV and an MV chemical reactor, now this recipe should actually work. And this is our sulfuric acid drum, and then we can place our ethanol right back in here. Well, if I actually do it properly. There we go. The next thing we need to do now that we have the CEF placed over there is actually hook up all of our conduits here, and we are too short. Awesome. I love blast furnace recipes. And now we can actually connect this up after having crafted a couple more. Now, here in a couple seconds, we'll finally have our first batch of ethylene crafted up. And there we go. Now we've got ethylene, and we've also got diluted sulfuric acid. So we'll make sure to get our steel drum filled with the ethylene here, so that way when we place it here, it actually just gets filtered in. Because I want to use the channel on the extract here, which we'll use purple for. And then we're also going to use the purple channel for the trash can over here, but we're going to make sure that we do not have you on extract immediately, so that way it doesn't immediately void our shit here. So now this will only take the diluted acid. We can make sure to not have the fluid conduit on there. And now when we extract, this will always extract everything out of here into the drum here or the trash can. Another thing I also need to make sure to do is have this insert into the chemical reactor here, because we're getting oxygen, but we're not getting these two, which might be a good idea to set this to purple as well. The main concern I have, or actually we can have this set to blue still, and then we can have this extract on a different channel. Well, yeah, we'll still have this extract on blue, and then that way it'll go straight into here. My main worry with this setup was that fluids would get mixed up if I didn't have all the filters set properly, but we should be good now, and this fluid filter on the trash can is basically required since we can't really get this to be smart about the whole diluted acid otherwise. And now finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, polyethylene. We can actually start crafting this now. All of this entire chain here of just chemical processing, just so that way we can get our first batch of polyethylene. Which means we can finally come to the board here and remove both sulfuric acid and polyethylene. I don't know about you, but it feels pretty good to hit that milestone there. Because now that we have polyethylene, we can actually start getting into auto-crafting a lot more easily. That was the main thing blocking us before. Unfortunately though, I think we're going to have to start auto-crafting next episode. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope to see you all in the next one, and until then, I'll see you next one.